Holy Spirit. Christ is risen. Our last Sunday in Pascha for this year. It's a glorious day, a little bit sad. It's a good day to talk about our heroes. Yes, Christianity, the winning team. We have our heroes. Today I want to speak about John, the theologian, the author of the fourth gospel. In the church, we know that there is some holy competition amongst the early church. There is the party of Paul. We also know that there's a party of Barnabas. There's a separation between Paul and Barnabas. We also know that there is an emphasis on a party following Peter. And so you have the two great apostles, Peter and Paul, and there are differences between them, styles, emphases. There is a third rail, a third wing of theology in the church. It's Johannine, it's John, who's given us not only a gospel, and sometimes we have litanies, spontaneous. Okay, Lord have mercy. To our visitors here, we are a full parish, we have children, and we rejoice in them, and we rejoice in the fact that they bring us evidence that we are Pentecostal, that the Holy Spirit can strike and you can have these great outbursts of joy, and we have it here in the most natural way. Children, small ones. In a more adult form, we should all do our duty to be Pentecostal and say Christ is risen as much as we can in the days that we've got left. And that's exactly what happened with John. John, we understand him, this third grouping of theology. We understand him to be the youngest of the apostles. If we measure him at about 20 years old at the Last Supper, then we can measure him at the time of the discovery of his gospel, which would be the year 91. He would be 78 years old, more or less. It is possible to envision him as a 78-year-old man at this time, certainly because David the king, we know, was 75. So to attain such an age is not completely out of possibility. We know 91 is an important date. This is where archaeologists help us. In Egypt, archaeologists found a mummified cat, oddly enough, and they investigated this relic, and they opened it. And inside they found papyrus. Papyrus is two-sided reeds that are laid down crosswise upon which you can write. And on this writing, to their shock, they found a significant portion of the Gospel of John in 91. That means that that text, archaeologically speaking, had already passed through the community, no doubt a Christian community. It already had passed, somehow had become perhaps damaged. I'm going to presume a good story here, it was damaged, and therefore it became separated, and therefore became, God forbid, refuse. Such as we would have newspapers back in the day of newspapers to stuff things, to move glasses and jars and bottles when we're moving. The Gospel of John, in that one fragment, became the stuffing of a pagan ritual, and it was discovered. God is marvelous, isn't he? That we would now be able to date that positively as the year 91 AD. This defeats an objection against John that began in the 17th and 18th century, that John was a fabrication, that John was an unknown author living maybe 200 years after the death of Christ. Because of the high theology of the gospel, which I'm going to come to in a moment, God, in his brilliant vision for us, will sometimes defeat our delusions. He takes time, God takes his time, as you know, and gives us this archaeological evidence to show that the Gospel of John is actually much younger than anyone thought. Previously to this finding, 150 was the date. Now you have to move it to at least 91. I would argue here, and I hope our friends here would agree with me, that when something becomes refuse, it's already rather old or suffered an uncharacteristic accident. Papyrus, of course, was not cheap. It was common, though, but it's still something expensive. So to do this means that that gospel text was probably intact and then became divided and separated. That means that John, at the time of his going afoul with the Roman government, may not have been 78 years old, but a little bit younger. And so I want to introduce you to the most dangerous man in all of the gospel. What do you do with someone who's dangerous politically? In Roman times, the answer is very simple. It's a black and white society. You kill him, you execute him. But John is the one apostle who is not executed. He is sent off to a desert island, Patmos, which is a prison colony, which gives evidence to the fact that he may have been older. But it also gives evidence to the fact that his authorities did not want him to have the pleasure of a martyr's death. I say pleasure in the sense to have the glory of the martyr's death through the suffering. They did not want that to come to him, and so exiled him to a wasting type of death. And you'll see the evil in this, that maybe in wasting away, he would in fact lose his faith, lose his verve, lose his energy. Again, God is not to be mocked. God will take John on the island of Patmos, and it's there, by tradition, that he will compose and set down into writing what we know today as the book of Revelation, or his apocalypse, where John will be like Daniel of the Old Testament, like Ezekiel the prophet, and will bring together a vision of Christianity as a theological, holy vision, but also political. And this is why John is the most dangerous of all of our New Testament thinkers. He offers to us a theory of holiness, but it's also wrapped in a theory of history. Let's cover this just for a moment, because we're his heirs. When you come to this temple, when you practice this form of faith, you will be hated, because you stand for a theology that says this world is passing away and has no power. Death has been overcome. You stand for a faith that firmly believes, as St. Paul tells us, we have no earthly city. Our city is the New Jerusalem. That's disturbing to political authorities, especially strong state authorities that are looking to make the state the place of your salvation, the form of your care, the form of all food and nourishment, the everything, the be-all and the end-all, as Macbeth tells us, which is a failed policy. No, Christianity is proposing actually a different theory, and it comes in the Gospel of John right from the very beginning. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was made flesh. And with that great annunciation, you have the beginning of a theory, actually, of time. That time is not an everlasting event. It's created. That means it has a beginning. It will have an end. And in that, you have the real fullness of the Christian message. We are actually in the moment of time, clock time, counting time. This punishing event of watching the clock tick away and watching our hair gray. And we know what that means for us. For if you're young, you're not burdened by this, but it will come for you. Christianity takes us out of clock time and the punishment of the passing of time, and takes us into the expectation of the end of time. That's dangerous stuff. That would land you in a jail sentence to waste away on a prison island. That's a dangerous theory. John doesn't stop there. John is an excellent moral teacher as well, because he explains to us why the world hates us. He explains it in one simple verse. Again, chapter 1 of his gospel. One verse. They hate the light. They hate Christ. They will hate us because they hate the light. What is the light? We heard it mentioned again. John is also an epistle author. And today's epistle, I would like to bring out a couple of lines if I could. Our saint today says, "That which we have seen and heard, we declare unto you, that you also may have fellowship with us," the church. And truly, our fellowship together, the church, is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ. That's the inner communion of the church, which reflects, which was said last week, the inner life of the Trinity coming through the flesh of Christ. And these things we write unto you, that your joy may be fulfilled. Joy, another attribute of the Christian life against the history of the world. We preach joy, everlasting joy, not just vacations and happiness and tax relief. This then is the message which we have heard from him and declare unto you, that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. If we say that we have fellowship with him and walk in darkness, we lie, and we do not have the truth. That's the moral teaching. But if we walk in the light, as he is the light, we have fellowship one with one another and with the blood of Jesus Christ, his Son, which cleanses everyone from sin. Magnificent moral teaching for us. But you're saying that's not enough to get a death sentence. That's not enough to be called the most hated man in all of theology. Well, now we will know why. You see, God doesn't make saints just for one age. He makes them for all ages. And in John, with the idea of God coming into the world and interrupting it, with God entering the world to sanctify the world, with God, the Word, coming in and taking flesh, we actually have a teaching that opposes probably the most influential idea of the 19th century. And it's that of a man, a genius man, quite frankly, whose writings are so persuasive and so captivating, difficult to read, but difficult to argue against. And so, suffering the bombardment of Napoleon in about the year 1805, a man named Georg set down his masterpiece in philosophy. It's called The Phenomenology of Spirit. And in this classic work, Hegel, this is George, will write a work that will influence the entire thought world of the West right up to the moment of the present. One of the ideas, and there are many, you know them, here it is, that our history is actually cyclical. We know it under a word that comes from his logic, which has been applied to history and politics. It's called dialectic, that you have thesis, antithesis, tension, opposition, violence, and it's resolved, and it comes down to a synthesis, which then becomes, of course, another thesis, and another antithesis, and another synthesis. You can see where this is going. It's unresolvable, and there's a process here. It's Hegel's famous theory of history. Christianity actually interrupts this vicious model, so much so that Marx will take it and turn it into real politics. That's another story, a painful one for the Russian church, indeed. Christianity, John tells us that the Lord has actually interrupted this process. We believe not in a cyclical pattern of history and viciousness, punishment, temporary resolution. We believe actually in a linear pattern of history where God interrupts time, where God comes into our life, stirs up trouble for us, saves us, changes us, deifies us, dignifies us. And that message is the message that John was able to finish in his exile. When he should have wasted away, he found his true glory. He found it in these epistles, these gospels, his book of Revelation. And it's ours now. These heroes of the faith, they belong to us to take us out of cycles and to take us into paradise where there is only the vision of God, to take us out of wants and needs, and to take us to the face of God where all of our needs and wants are satisfied, to take us out of struggles and, need I say it, war, where you come into beatitude and you have God's peace, everlasting fellowship with him. Christ is risen. The blessings of the Lord be upon you through his grace and love towards mankind, always now and ever.